All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shurtleff, and I am the director and co-founder of Camp Constitution. I want to welcome you to our very first monthly meeting of the Southern Maine Friends of Camp Constitution. And so I'm sure most of you are familiar with us. We're a New Hampshire-based charitable trust, and I currently live in New Hampshire, in Alton, New Hampshire, not too far away, where we hope to live there for many years. But back in 2017, well actually, yeah, here's a picture of our camp 2 years ago, our annual family camp. Last year's camp, it rained during picture day, so we decided to use this. And you can't see the cannons, but there are two cannons that belong to this gentleman, Steve Boninger, but we're all climbing on them, so you can't really see them. So this was at the the Singing Hills Christian Camp and Retreat Center, where we're going to have our camp this year as well. This would be what we got from 2020, so this would be our fourth year there. So we're very pleased with it. And so this year's camp runs from July 16th to the 21st, and there's the cannons there. By the way, we proved Joe Biden wrong. He said that the Second Amendment doesn't give you the right to own cannons. Well, they never talked to Steve here, because I think we also have a ladies' retreat that is coming up in early May. And we have two featured speakers. One of them is, she's not an actress, but she played a role in the movie Unplanned. If you've seen that movie, the story of Abby Johnson, she was the abortion nurse in that scene. And because she was an abortion nurse in her unsaved days, so she's got quite a story to tell. And then we're going to have the youngest elected official in the United States. She just got elected. She lives in Salem, New Hampshire as a state rep. She's 18 years of age. And when I invited her, she said, oh, Camp Constitution, count me in. I'll be there. I'll be at your camp too, your week-long camp. And then we have weekend retreat in late September. And there's a picture of, oh, that's the next ring. There's a picture of some of our ladies. My wife is one. My wife's she does the arts and crafts. She is very gifted when it comes to wreath making and many things like that. And it's a great time, good fellowship. And we host the Samuel Blumenfeld Archive. This is a great resource for educators, homeschoolers. Last year we got 3/4 views. And you see the picture. Oh no, it's on the next slide. We also are in parades. You can't really see that one, but that's Steve's Cannons. We were in the Alton Old Home Day, Old Home Week Parade last year, and we won first place. Wow. We got a nice little trophy and $150, you better believe it. When we were going by the judges, I was passing out constitutions, and I said, I'm not going to give you any because you think I'm bribing you, you know. So that's what we do. We pass out constitutions, and we had some of them, my wife and a few other ladies dressed in colonial outfits. We had a great time. And we were in the St. Patrick's Day parade as well. That was a lot of fun. We were very well received there, and there was like 100,000 people there. Most of them were probably a little on the inebriated side.
Where was that parade?
South Boston,
oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And we like to be, it's like conservative. We talk about the Green New Deal and all that. I think people who love our country love private property, but we also respect public property. And we sponsor 2 miles of highway on Route 28 from the Wilkesboro line in New Hampshire, and I say it's probably the cleanest stretch of 28 from Cape Cod all the way to Ossipee, right? I mentioned our Samuel Blumenfeld Archive. We have people from around the world, but mainly in the United States, and this is a Christian school of all places, Harare, Zimbabwe. The principal reached out to me a couple of years ago. God knows Matsa Rofi, a wonderful guy. And he saw our stuff online. He started using it, he printed it out, and he started using it. And he then contacted me and said, will we donate some? And I said, we'll be happy to. So we sent them well over 100. I said, all I'd like is a few pictures or maybe a couple of videos using the Blumenfeld alphaphonics. And he said he had such great success teaching their children. Zimbabwe English is the official language. There's about 15 languages, but it's the official language. We just sent them off 2 cases, and by the way, it takes like 3 months to get there. You know, it may take a week to get there, but then from in country to where they are takes a while. But we're happy to help out. We also have a publishing arm, and I've got a few of the items here. And that's a biography of John Stark. And this one here, you say 1928 Army Manual. That's kind of a boring read. This was a great history book. And what happened was, whoever wrote this was quite the patriot, and he referred to the country as a republic and said democracy leads to communism. And when Franklin Roosevelt became president, they got rid of these books. They destroyed as many as they could, but they didn't get them all. And we got a couple. We put them in a PDF version, so it's great. It's a great history lesson. Now, the city of Boston used to have something called a third-party flag raising activity. So I think it was started in 2007 or 2008, somewhere around there, where local-based organizations can get a permit to fly a flag, have a ceremony. Now, I wasn't aware of it until probably '09. I was at the courthouse, the Suffolk Superior Courthouse, just being dismissed from jury duty at the request of my boss. I was going to be in panel for 3 months, which I really didn't mind. But he said, "Oh no, you can't do that." I remember crossing the street and they were flying the flag of Communist China. I said, "What's going on here?" And they had Chinese people. I learned it was the Chinese, so-called the Chinese Progressive Association of Boston, which is basically an arm of the Chinese Communists. And they had elected officials there too. Ayanna Pressley, surprise, surprise, she was at one of these events. She was a member of the squad, but before that, she was a city councilor. And so I didn't. So I used to show up with some friends, and we would just pass out information. We had signs about why we shouldn't be celebrating Communist. Very peaceful, but and we met people from the Falun Gong group that were being persecuted by the Chinese Communists. And in 2014, I think, or maybe 13, we actually raised the Gadsden flag. We had a nice ceremony, and Garrett Lear, Patriot Pastor Garrett Lear, a late friend, came. He had his black robe regiment on. You know, if he wasn't wearing that, I sometimes wouldn't recognize him. If he was just wearing a shirt and a blazer or something like that, it's, oh, that's Garrett. And he had his musket. We had a great day. We had a nice. We didn't have that many people there. So, in June of 17. A inner city pastor, Bruce Wall, had invited me to participate at a prayer meeting at the City Hall in the mayor's office. At that time, there was Mayor Walsh, Marty Walsh. He now works for Joe Biden, and Joe Biden calls him Walsh Marty, but it's actually Marty Walsh. He had been a moderate Democrat when he was a state rep, and he became very heart-left, as time went on. And so I was very impressed by this prayer meeting. Now, Walsh was nowhere to be found. He was the outside of town. He had nothing to do with it. But at this prayer meeting, there were blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, and we prayed for the city. We prayed for its leaders and the leaders of our state and country. The Bible doesn't say you only pray for the leaders you like, because if that were the case, it would be a very short prayer. But I left there thinking we need to do more. The Christian community in Boston, the believing community, not the Christians, the Bible-believing Christians, and the people of faith. So I say this tongue-in-cheek. My inner P.T. Barnum kicked in, but it was really the Holy Spirit, and it was let's fly the Christian flag to commemorate Boston's rich Christian history and Constitution Day, and which falls on September 17th. That particular year, I think it fell on a Sunday or a Saturday. So I called the lady who was in charge of the permits, the one I dealt with a few years earlier. She was Mayor Menino, the late Mayor Menino's daughter-in-law. She was very helpful, and she said, "Well, just send me an email, tell me what you want to do, and we'll get it for you." And I said we were going to have we wanted to fly the Christian flag. We were going to have several speakers. One of them would be Reverend Kraft. Some of you, he's been to this church before. And Rev's topic was going to be the need for racial reconciliation. We don't need that anymore. Of course, we're all set, right? No, we need it more than ever. Or racial harmony. We were going to have another speaker from the South Sudan, who's become a good friend of mine. We should get him here sometime. And his topic was the blessings of liberty as a U.S. citizen. Here's a man that was persecuted by the Muslims. He was about to be executed. He was able, the truck broke down, he was able to get away. He's got quite a story to tell. And the other speaker, we would have had a few more, is a historian, Richard Howell, who's going to give a little history lesson on Boston's rich Christian history. So that was about July until early September. I made a few emails, and I don't remember all the details, but the lady said, you should get up, I don't know what's going on. And call this guy if you don't get up in the next couple of days. Well, she finally called me in early September, and she said that you were denied. And she said, I know that's not the end of it. I said, no, it's not. I said, can you send me an email or a letter with the official reason why it was denied? And that afternoon, I get an email from the man who became the defendant in the case, Mr. Rooney, who lived in West Roxbury. I probably used to pass him in the supermarket. I didn't really know him. He's probably a decent guy. And he said, separation of church and state in the email. He said, if you could fly a secular flag, we can consider that, not a problem. And in the email was embedded the city seal, which is a Bible verse from the Old Testament, right? 1 Kings. It was in Latin. You know, I know a few words here and there. It said, may God favor us as he favored our forefathers. And that seal is also on the city's flag too. So you get a Bible verse on the city flag and on the city seal, but to have a flag raising ceremony, what I would call this flagpole is a public access flagpole. They said that was a violation of the First Amendment. And you know the city of Boston is strict constructionist, right? It's also a...
It's always under construction.
It's also a... What's that?
It's always under construction.
Yeah, that construction, right, yes. Yeah, so they had no trouble making Boston a sanctuary city, violating federal law. But when it comes to that First Amendment, we're sticklers, right? So the minute I saw that response, I said, we have a case here. And I sent out an email that night to local media and some friends, and not one member of the local media bothered to contact me. Oh, who cares? Who's this group? Who are they? Not important. But a friend of mine, Lynn Roberts, of the Massachusetts Second Amendment Sisters, said, contact Liberty Counsel. And I've heard of Liberty Counsel, but I didn't really, I never really had any connections with them. Although Matt Staver, I discovered, was on our email list, so he reached out to us, I think, long before this case, put the same, I think he was looking at our Samuel Blumenfeld archive. Anyway, they got back to me the very next day, and he said, we want to take your case. Pro bono, and I signed a contract, and they said, we'll take it as far as the Supreme Court. They sent out a demand letter, and basically the demand letter is to the city and to the defendant, saying that if you don't allow Mr. Shurtleff and his group to fly their flag, we're going to sue you. And that made the front page of the Boston Herald. I remember when I was living in West Roxbury, so I'm going to go, we used to subscribe to this, but haven't for years. It's not worth subscribing, there's not much in there. And I thought, oh, I figured it'd be on page 20. I was interviewed by a few newspapers and Channel 4, I think, news channel. And this was the front page. I was shocked. Front page story, no fly zone. Kim got a little credit, a little extra, right underneath there, right? I thought, oh, this is pretty cool. So a year later, it was the following July is when the lawsuit was actually filed in federal court. And some people say, why not state court? Well, the city said First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, so that was why they built the jurisdiction. If they said the state constitution, they would have to go in the state court. And our first hearing was in August while our camp was running. Our camp was in Pittsfield, Massachusetts at that time. So we had to get drive and take the 3-hour ride. I didn't mind, it was nice to do that. I just wish they did it a little later, but what can you do? And the judge we faced was Denise Casper, appointed by Obama. So we didn't expect to get her to tell the city to let us fly the flag. And she's also presided over Whitey Bulger's case too. So we lost there, and it was gaining more media attention as time went on. I was on the Jeff Kuhner show in July of 18, and many other programs. I was interviewed by different legal entities from all over the country. And then they went to the federal First Court of Appeals, and we lost 3-0. And then they actually started another suit, and they got more information. They said there'd been 286 permits. This is the first time that they've ever denied a permit. They only denied it because of the content. It was basically discrimination because it's a Christian flag, and so we could have called it a Camp Constitution flag, and they would have been fine with it, because the flag is a non-denominational flag. So let's see, I think it was February of 21 is when they said Well, time goes by fast, doesn't it? This is when it was that we lost at the First Circuit Court, again, 3-0. Then I said, okay, on to the Supreme Court. And the case was actually hand-delivered to the Supreme Court in June of 21. And it's wonder how God works. The man who delivered it used to live 2 doors down from where we lived. He's now one of our camp instructors, Jonathan Alexander. His dad is head of pastor of a Haitian church, a big, large church. And in that same year, in September 30th, the Supreme Court decided to hear it. Now that itself was a major event, because they only hear 1% of the cases they take. I mean, of all the cases that are presented, they take about 1%. Reverend Kraft, he said, Hallie, we know we're going to win. This is all in God's hands. And I said, absolutely, it's in God's hands. So, and that's when a few days after the Supreme Court decided to hear it, the city of Boston finally reached out to our attorneys, and they said, we'd like to settle. We will pay the cost, the court cost, and we will also let you guys fly your flag. So the attorney had called me and say, look, do you want to settle? I said, I don't want to settle. I said, what's fun? There's no fun in that. You know, we have a one-time ceremony and then that's it. And I learned since then that had we settled, that case would have went down as a defeat for the First Amendment. I said, this is much bigger than one flag-raising ceremony. I said, no. I said, I'm not a gambling man. I said, but let's roll those dice, you know. So the city said, okay, fine. And the Supreme Court heard the case January of 22. January, was it 18, hon? So we went down the night before, had a wonderful prayer vigil, and we had a rally the next morning in front of the Supreme Court. A little cold, and it was gaining all kinds of media coverage. It was even op-ed pieces of ACLU. No friend of ours gave us an amicus brief on our behalf. We had about 18 amicus briefs. One of them came from the Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice. The ACLU, we had Notre Dame University, we had a group called Catholic Vote, we had other various Christian groups, Alliance Defending Freedom, and many others. And we actually had 12 Attorney Generals on our behalf, amicus briefs. We had 9 against us, including Attorney General of Maine, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., Connecticut, so no surprise there. And some of these left-wing groups, what was it, separation of state and church and things like that. And the media coverage was phenomenal. So we had our rally, and that's a picture of us down there, a bunch of us down there freezing, but it was a great time. There's Reverend Kraft, there's Pastor Levy, who was going to be one of the original, there's Beckworth from the Massachusetts Family Institute. And we had a congresswoman showed up. There's Pastor David Whitney of the Institute on the Constitution. He took the subway in. He didn't live too far away. We had a great time. And while we weren't allowed inside the courtroom because they still had COVID protocols. Yeah, there's a Chinese Communist flag over the city of Boston. And I do want to point out there were some places that were flying the Christian flag. This was in New Britain, Connecticut, where a Hispanic church flew the Christian flag. That was a year before our case. And Muskegon, Michigan, said no, but because of our case, they did away with any third-party flags, so it means no rainbow flags. And this is the city of Boston flag right there on the left. You can't really see the Bible verse too well. The flag in the center is known as the Bunker Hill flag. So a lot of us seen this. And the only difference is the color scheme is arranged a little bit, and there's a pine tree. And we all know that, you know the concept of why the pine tree was used as a symbol during the War of Independence? Well, if you had a pine tree that was more than 12 inches in diameter, it belonged to the king, even if it was on your land. And if you cut it down, you were fined. So that was the sign. It was like it was a polite middle finger to King George III, is how I describe it. And the Christian flag, this flag doesn't go back that far. It goes back to Coney Island in the late 1890s. Charles Orton and Ralph Diffendorfer. One was a Sunday school superintendent, the other was a Methodist missionary. And they designed this very simple flag. Do you have one in your sanctuary? Yes. So I think a lot more people. So here are some of the articles: a public flagpole, a Christian flag, and the First Amendment. And we got some nasty press, but we got some not so bad press. One of the worst articles that we got was a group called Word and Way, so-called Christian group out of Missouri, far left I get 10 minutes. All right, so here is our, they don't have any cameras inside the courtroom, but Matt Staver on the left, and you notice there's an empty chair, right? What happened? Well, Neil Gorsuch wouldn't wear his mask. So, what's her name? The liberal Supreme Court Justice, she's Hispanic?
Sotomayor?
Yeah, Sotomayor, thank you. She wouldn't sit next to him, so she's in the next room, you know, so that was pretty funny. And we listened to the oral argument, and some of the attorneys in the room with us, where Liberty Counsel has a building behind the Supreme Court, they were laughing. They said, we might win this 9-0. He said, even the liberal justices were in our corner. Well, I'm not going to read, these are just some of the comments that were made, and you can actually listen. It wasn't that long, but it was just funny. Clarence Thomas was in our camp. Justice Amy Coney, isn't celebrating Constitution considered an event, right? In response, Clarence Thomas stated, if Christians are not part of the diversity, the city said, the city attorney said their goal was to foster diversity of communities and commemorate events or occasions. That was the reason for that. And Clarence Thomas said, aren't Christians part of that diversity? He said, if it doesn't, then you have limited diversity. And Coney Barrett said, isn't celebrating Constitution considered an event? It's on the federal calendar. It's not a federal holiday. Neil Gorsuch also noted that the city cast religion into the same category as speech deemed offensive by censoring the religious viewpoint. And that was a press conference at the front of the Supreme Court after the oral argument. And Justice Breyer, who's since retired, he even made reference to the ugly building, the city hall, as brutalist architect. I call it neo-Stalinist. But I think that may have been the first time that architecture had nothing to do with the case. He was just describing the building. He's back at Harvard. He was, I think, taught at Harvard. And so all these different articles. George Will, why the Supreme Court told Boston its Christian flag ban won't fly. I was on Newsmax, Fox and Friends, ABC, National, ABC, NBC, CBS. Most of it was right in my, my house, my office. I didn't, fly all over the country. Although I did speak to some groups down in D.C., Concerned for America. And now the Supreme Court, they usually make their decision within several days of the oral argument, but they don't always release it. So, and it was in early May. That's the same time that they leaked Roe v. Wade. And they sort of took a little bit of our thunder because I'm about to get onto the Rob Schmidt show, Rob Schmidt on Newsmax. And the producer said, would you want to talk about Roe v. Wade? They had no idea what my thoughts on it. I said, sure I will. I thought they were going to bump me, but they didn't. And so this was the headline, Supreme Spanking, a Boston Herald. The court ruled 9-0 in our favor, which is it's not unusual for 9-0, but a case like ours it is. And it was a great time. And I thought, okay, and media coverage all around the world. See, the world is looking in our country to see what's going on and see what's happening. And of course, we got our share of nasty, a few death threats here and there, which I'm not too worried about. Someone wants to, if I was going to murder somebody, I wouldn't tell them first. I'd probably just surprise them. So, and they actually allowed us to fly the flag, one-time flag raising ceremony. And so early August, we had 200 people there. We had a couple of our campers play. We raised the flag to Amazing Grace on violin and trumpet. And then Jonathan Alexander, he emceed it, and he's got a beautiful voice. He sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic as the flag was going down. And that made all kinds of media coverage. It was a great time. And there's the flag on the right in the city. And a couple of days later, the Satanists said, we want to fly our flag. The city of Boston said, we're not flying any other third-party flags. It's done, And in early November, the city of Boston settled with our law firm, not us. So if you want a loan, you have to go to Liberty Counsel. $2.1 million. That's what happened, and that's not including the fees they got to pay their attorney. And there's the check that Mayor Wu signed to Liberty Counsel. Wow. $2,125,000. And I got about a few minutes before the Lemon versus Kurtzman. The Lemon test is put to rest. This was a Supreme Court decision from the early 70s, and this was taken so much out of context. Lemon was the gentleman on the left. He was the plaintiff, and it was basically a case where a couple of states were giving money to parochial schools, And he said, that's a violation. But they were using this as a means to stop kids from saying God bless you in schools, or saying, bringing in candy canes because it's shaped like a J and has a Christian, things like that. And so just because you're offended by something isn't reason why you can't have it. So that was, I think, the most important part of Shurtleff v. Boston. And we had people reach out to me all over the country in different towns. They were so motivated and so excited. The guy in Vermont, Randolph, Vermont, called up. He said, Hal, thanks to you, the Black Lives Matter flag came down from the high school, unceremoniously. And just today, I got an email, and Coos Bay, C-O-O-S, Coos Bay in Washington, they're not going to fly rainbow flags because someone wanted to fly a Christian flag, so they said we're not flying any flag. And Surfside, Florida was another town where they're not going to be flying any flags. They flew the heterosexual flag in Fitchburg right around Christmas time, and the people who sponsored it said, we don't like the idea of, but if you're going to fly rainbow flags and promote one, we're going to fly this one. And the mayor participated in the ceremony. I thought that was pretty interesting. We had Christian flag raisings in Plymouth, Mass, and Lowell, Mass, and Fitchburg. And then these are just some of the towns and cities around the country that have done away with their third-party flag raising because of our case. Reading and North Reading, Massachusetts, Medina, Ohio, Delaware, Ohio, Muskegon, Michigan, and many, many more. So with now, tongue-in-cheek here, I said, this will make a great movie. I plan to write a book, Shurtleff v. Boston, the movie. Now, who's going to be in the movie? Dennis Quaid will have to play me, of course. And my wife, Janine Turner. My wife's much prettier than Janine Turner, but that's about as best as we can get. Morgan Freeman, of course, plays Reverend Kraft. Have to. Stacey Dash has to play Edith Kraft. And Dule Hill plays Jonathan. And our attorney, Roger Gannon, who's our major attorney, Tim Allen. What do you think? But I said this, and somebody said he knows a screenwriter that used to be an actor in Hollywood. He played the Little Rascals. He played Alfalfa in the remake.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a funny sounding name, but he said, he presented this to me. He said, I don't know, it looks interesting. So maybe, all we need is about $50 million, and we'll get us started. So that's it. Thank you for, and I just say, that this was God's glory. This was all God's doing. You know, I was just his instrument, and I was very pleased that I was allowed to be part of this. But we had a lot of people support us, and I want to thank you. And for those of you who are watching, visit our website, campconstitution.net, to learn more about us and to help to participate in our activity. So with that, I want to thank you.